terminus de ce train.
Hello, Virginie.
Hey, hello.
Thank you so much for welcoming us in your home in Nantes.
It's a pleasure.
On this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Virginie, before we go into any questions, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about who you are.
It's quite a tricky question, actually. Who I am. The first thing which comes to my head, to my mind, is I'm the mother of three. So basically, it must mean something. Mother of three children. One is 14, and one is 10, and one is 9, 2 boys and a girl. And then, when I'm not a mother, I'm a very passionate person about what happens in the world, the environment. So I do work with several hats. I don't know if you say that in
exactly
English.
How you say it.
Yeah. I do wear several hats, but all connected with mostly environment today, and how climate change, biodiversity, and how to improve. I mean, the thing is, I want to contribute with what I can do. So it could be working with companies. I make a lot of conferences. I write articles, books, do some consultancy, things like that. Work sometimes with association. And what else? I also have 3 cats. Mm-hmm. Something which was, it still belonged to who I am and what I am. Is my husband. He's dead now, by now, almost 4 years ago. But how to say that? I met him very early in my life, and we did so many things. We shared so many things. He taught me so many things. I learned so much with him. So even if he's not here, he's also a big part of my life. Obviously, he's also the father of my kids. And we used to work together. He's still a big inspiration to me. So yeah, the world is a big inspiration. My children, my husband. And then as skills, I'm more specialized in geopolitics and in future studies. That's basically my...
your field of expertise.
Yeah, my expertise. I moved to Nantes 3 years ago. Before that, I was living 50 kilometers away from Paris in the countryside. Now we live right in the center of the city. After my husband died, I had to move away from the place where I was. First of all, I could not afford it anymore, and beside that, we were in the countryside. And when you're in the countryside and you have 3 kids, it means you drive all the time. And I just don't want to be a taxi driver. That was not exactly my... it took me too much time, and I wanted to teach my children autonomy. And it's very difficult to teach them autonomy when they cannot move by themselves, And so then I decided I would move to a city, and I wanted to be in the center of the city with many transportation possibilities. So I first looked at all the cities and then it has to be 2 hours away from Paris because of my job. So I work home, but still I have a lot of meetings and conferences and things like that. And most of the time it's in Paris. So so I looked at all the cities which were 2 hours or 3 away from Paris. Then third criteria was I don't want to have any souvenir with my husband there, because the point was not to be nostalgic.
Yes.
I wanted to put my nostalgia away. So that was the best way to create new souvenir. And Nantes was one of them. Then it has to be affordable. Then because I wanted to have a big space for my kids, and then I like this city also because it's in terms of environment, of civil society, it's very active and very pro-democrat, pro-environment. So that's also a great motivation. You have many people who are very committed to many activists, and intellectually it was challenging. So many reasons, and they all make me come to Nantes. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
And so we're in Nantes today on this beautiful Sunday, 17th of October. But yesterday you came back from Scotland.
Yeah.
The week before you were,
I don't know. I don't remember.
You have a very busy work schedule. I'm just really curious about something you shared with me about this conference, which was namely TED.
Yeah, in Edinburgh. Yeah.
In Edinburgh, and I'm interested in this analysis, or in this this opinion you came back with, or this feeling that it is very worrisome, the difference in in viewpoints, and so I'd be really curious to ask you on tape actually.
The conference is called the Summit Countdown, and it was launched last year. And it's dedicated to climate change. And the purpose of it is to gather in the same place scientists, politicians, activists, business people, and all kinds of people, and with a common interest for climate change and how to fight, of course, against climate change, how to mitigate. And how to adapt to, it's mostly mitigation so far. So it deals with question of energy, of soils, of urbanization, and all these big issues which are very much connected with climate change. And so it's a 4 days session. 4 days conference we had like 7 sessions, I think. Of talks and breakfast session, which were more like lab or workshop. So you had people from all over the world, but still TED is an Anglo-Saxon, if not American.
Yes.
So I guess if the same conference would have been organized by French people, for instance, or for German people, by German people, it would have been different. Even though the curator who did that is not American at all. But there is, it's in English, so one of the reasons, all the talks are in English, so that's also a reason for... it was very interesting. It was challenging for the talks because most of them were very scientific, or it's, as Bruno, the curator, said, it's not so easy to make the issue of methane emission very sexy, or the building materials, which are very important in terms of gas emission. To make it sexy as well. And usually the TED Talks, it's always nice story, and you cannot do it. It's really more difficult. Yeah, it's more difficult with technical or scientific issues as the one who deal with the climate change. So that was very challenging for the organizers and the speakers, and so in that sense it was really positive, and we had quite a broad view. However, one thing is everybody comes with its own solution or proposal of solution. And when you take a look at all of them at once, you can see that everybody thinks he has a solution. Not exactly. Everybody would say we have to be together and so on. That's implicit. But still, you can see that everybody is pulling in a direction, but not everybody in the same direction, and that's a very big issue. At some point of the conference, we had a panel of speakers, including one Scottish young lady who is an activist, who fights against a new plan of oil how do you say that? Oil drilling
drilling.
plan, and which should take place in northern Scotland, actually, in the North Sea. And you had the boss, the CEO of Shell, the oil company, and that was really tense and very rushed moment. And then you realize that was the extreme example, but they're not the only ones. How this issue of climate make people sometimes autistic. So everybody wants to remain in its own logic and doesn't take the time or enough energy to listen to the others. So some people would think it's a technical question, and they will address the issue only with technical solution. And some others will think it's more systemic per solutions. Many think it's an energy problem. Very few. I mean, it was not so much mentioned, but that would be more the case in France or in Germany, in some European countries. We think that it's a question of behavior. So yeah, you can have it's an issue of behavior, consumption, of economic model, or a question of energy. And if you think it's a question of economic model, or if you think it's a question of techniques to absorb CO2, for example, then you pull in opposite direction. And actually, it's possible to have them both, but when you're very much involved, because you're a scientist or because you're a boss of a company, you really focus on your own analyze, and so you don't pay enough attention to others. And even though both are very committed to the same goal, actually it can become very chaotic and or at least inefficient. And I could feel that really you have a more European view and a more American view on these issues.
So if you were to sum it up in a nutshell, the European versus the American how would you say in
it's a caricature, because of course you would find many exceptions. But I have the feeling that Americans are much more focused on technical solution.
Okay.
And energy, for them it's an energy issue. Like Europeans would be more, more European would think that it's an economic model issue.
Okay.
And also behavior and consuming. And the thing is, Europeans are very much dependent for their energy, for the minerals, so they're much more jeopardized or threatened by the ecological crisis and resource shortage than Americans. So basically, they're not in the same situation, so they cannot have the same view. And besides, I think there is much more trust in techniques and progress in the American culture than it is in Europe, for different reasons, historical reasons. I don't put any judgment, I just describe what I feel, but I don't. Of course, I'm very European, and I have my own approach. But I don't want to say that Americans are wrong or Europeans are right. But my concern, and Chinese would have a very different view. And my concern is that I didn't feel enough the concern. The will to fight for how do you say that? The common interest. Yes. It didn't rise enough. If we all feel the common interest, it would be so much easier than to go all in the same direction. From different points with different, some will take a bus, some will take a car, some trains or a plane, whatever, if we go in the same direction. But this direction actually has not been defined enough. Some think the direction is to keep a way of life as it is. Some think it's to preserve the planet. Some would think, so if we don't agree that we have all the same common interests, and if we cannot make it if you cannot describe what it is precisely, then I think it's a bit worrisome, and that's where we are now, between countries, between culture. Something the goal is to preserve a civilization. It's very.
And what would you say? What is your goal as a
Personally?
Personally, yeah, as a.
Well, my concern is mostly young generation and future generation. I'm very sad and upset and concerned by the fact that more than half of young people, for the interview that was published by Lancet recently, are very concerned, extremely concerned by the climate change. And my concern is to preserve it so that future generation can be happy and can live decently, with dignity and decently for a long way. I mean, a long term.
Do you decide to take an approach that's optimistic in a way? What is it, or are you? I'm just interested in.
Very often, it's funny, because very often some people ask me to do conference because they think I'm optimistic.
They think that? Or,
yeah.
Or you think, okay.
I'm described as.
Okay.
And I'm not. But I'm very determined as a personality. And I don't accept things. I mean, that's also what I'm specialized in future studies.
Yeah.
When you work in future, I mean, in foresight or future studies, you know that we are in a systemic thing, and that when you belong to a system, it's very hard to move the whole system. But when it does, it can go very quickly. So we have, for me, my approach is let's imagine what can put this system in movement, and then it can be quite fast. And also to when we have this common interest, when we have defined it, when we have the good story to tell to the people, then they feel attracted by this story, then they will go for it. If you just tell to the people, well, it's going to be difficult, you will have less of this and less of that, and you will have, well, of course they won't, they don't want to hear that, and so they don't want to move to that. If you show to them, if you tell them, I mean, it's the same for me, if I'm, what it could be and how well I could be in that new story, then I feel more curious and I will give it a try. And I experienced that I told you once, I experienced that with the death of my husband. I can develop that afterwards. But so the point is, for me, is not to be optimistic or pessimistic. It's to find a way to tell a story that is attractive enough and understandable enough, so that people can feel motivated to act, to change, to move on.
And so it's not just tell a story, it's starting Convention 21 and projects. So you're telling a story, but also really through action.
It all comes from experience. I will give you two experiences. One is not mine at all. It's the construction of, the European community story. When you think about it, we're in 1945. Europe is destroyed. You have several people, French people, German people, Dutch people, Belgium, Italy. They all hate each other. They suffered. They're ruined. It's been 100 years of continuous war. And at that point, they are poor. The cities are destroyed. Many people are dead. And then you have a few politicians, absolutely visionaries, who think instead of trying to solve our difference, to like we did for 100 years with guns and with weapons, why should not we try to create a common interest, and then we will be united around this common interest, and then it's going to be more and more difficult to fight if we have the same interest. And so that's what they did with coal and steel and coal.
Steel and coal, yeah.
And that was 6 years. It was in 1951, the foundation of European Community for Coal and Steel, only 6 years after the end of the war. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. It's a tremendous, I mean, it's a revolution. Can you imagine to be for a French and to be have a common interest with Germans 6 years after the end of the war? That's, for me, it's amazing. And so that if it was done once, it can be done another time. So that's what makes me not optimistic. But I believe some things can, for some reason, at some point, can move fast. And at that time, the common interest was peace, because it's better for economy and so on and so on. So that's an experience. And the other experience is when my husband died 4 years ago. I lost everything. He was my love. He was my best friend. He was a father of my kids. He was earning 80% of the family revenue. He was my colleague, because we have funded a company together, a research center together, and we had dream together, we had project together. So all of us, from 1 minute to another, because he was not sick for a long time, it was very, very sudden. So from 1 minute to another, I lost everything. And the temptation at that time is to go with him. You know, is it worse to continue without him? You know, when it's been like almost 30 years we were together, I didn't feel like, you know, keep on going without him. But then I have 3 kids, and they were very little. They were 4, 5, and 9 by then. And how I was not going, I could not tell them, well, you know, my love, my treasures, as I call them, it's over, game is over. We had the best. We had the best part of our life, but now it's over. Dad is not here, so we don't have a revenue anymore. But no, I cannot do that. Just like we cannot do today with the young generation. We cannot tell them, well, too bad, you know, it was great. The 90s, the early 21st century, it was really fun, wonderful, but now it's over. We have no resource anymore. We're going to have climate change, the biodiversity decrease, and so on and so on. Too bad. That's no, you cannot tell that. So what I did with Barthélemy, Emile, and Violette, my children, is we try every evening during a few weeks, if not a few months, to imagine what another story can be, what our life story could become. So, as I said earlier, we had to move. I knew that we could not stay in the house where we were. And so I said, okay, I think we should move to another city. And instead of having a garden, maybe we will be in an apartment. So how could it be? Yeah, and maybe in this apartment you don't have a room each, because it's more difficult. And oh yes, it's not funny, you know, to share a room. Yeah, but then imagine if you have one bed. I don't know how do you call that.
Bunk beds.
Bunker beds.
Bunk beds.
Bunker beds.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's fun, bunker beds. And you know, slowly, little piece by little piece, like a puzzle, we put. A piece after a piece, and then suddenly we had the picture. And of course, where we are now is not the picture we described, but we had finally the idea of moving. We knew towards what we wanted to move, and we knew it could be affordable, we could do it, and that's what telling a story is about.
It's so beautiful. So that was a project you built with your children.
Yeah.
The next chapter.
And so it was not so difficult for them when I just said, okay, now we're going to move to Nantes. And it was much less difficult, because the whole, you know...
They were prepared.
They were prepared.
Yeah.
And they wanted to, because suddenly change was positive, whereas when their father died, it was really, you know, ils le subissaient. They were
victims of
of the change. And suddenly they were actors of the change. And that's a very different perspective. So that's 2 examples to tell you that I believe that we can do it. It can go fast, if only we have the good reasons, so the good story to do it. But that's the difficult part, is to share, to make up these stories and to share it, and so that's where we are now. And my worry, my concern is that we don't have this story at all, common stories. We have so many stories, and everybody think, I mean the American thing, the Chinese, the Indian, the European think they have the good story. But since it's not, they're all different stories, it's going to be really difficult.
So which are ways that for you to take action, or that ways for you to actually help companies, people, come to realization and move about?
At the moment, and for a few years already, I realized that companies are very likely one of the key actors, if not the key actor, to move on, because economic interest is so strong that it's really, it's a key question to how to accommodate, if I can say so, economy and climate change. And there is, when you analyze why we haven't gone there yet, why is it still so? There is many reasons. I could I have a whole conference about it. But when one of the criteria, I mean one of the obstacle, is indeed this economic model, which is not. It was not done for to preserve environment. It was done for different reasons and with a certain objective. But we can see that it doesn't coincide anymore with the resources, the ecosystem. So we had to make them fit together again, the economy and our biological balance and the global ecosystem. So I decided that I would work more with companies and try to accompany them, or to alert them, to advise them. So at the moment, a few months ago, with a friend of mine, we created a kind of initiative. It's not like to do another one, because there are many initiatives already, but we want to federate, or like to exhaust, enhance the impact of other initiative. So what we did, we set up a process in 3 different parts. The first part of the process, the idea is to gather together all parties of the economy, which means the companies, but also the unions, the consumers, associations, civil society association, territories like region, because they're all actors of the economy together. And ask to all these parties, what are their fears about the change, the transition, the global transition we're going through? What are their fears, and what are their proposals for it to reach the goal? The goal, which is to go to zero net emission. And then we're going to analyze the answers and analyze what they say and what they don't say, but they think, because you have what your words say, but you also what it undermines.
Yes.
And then we go to a second part. The second part is to gather, to pick up 150 companies according to 4 criteria. One is their activity, the number of employees, where they stand in France, and their different stages, legal stages. And these 150 companies are going to be represented either by their CEO, or an employee, or an investor. So it's going to be 60 CEOs, 60 employees, and 30 investors. So we have all the parties of the companies itself. And they will have to, based on the first phase, they will have to take into account the preoccupation, but also all the proposal, and select and formulate 100 proposals to achieve to reach zero net emission by 2050 and to fit with the commitment of France in terms of climate change and biodiversity. So that's going to take place during 6 weekends with experts and specialists and from all types and debates, so they can formulate this proposal. And then we go into a third phase, which is the dissemination phase, which will be done by all the parties who were at first stand, disseminate through other companies and through the administration, politicians, and so on, to implement, of course, these proposals.
And so this is going to be over what, 2 years, 3 years?
We're going to start by the end of this year, by the end of 2021, and all next year.
All of next year,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
And what is interesting is, in this process, it's very democratic. Second, we put together different parties that usually don't belong to the same, don't go for the same process. They don't talk necessarily to each other. But then we're going to try to find their common interest, what I mentioned before, and to build on that. Yeah. Instead of building on what are their fears and no, we're going to try to find what they have in common, what we can build on, because they all have the same issue in mind or same concern, and then we will build on solutions that they already exist. Actually, we know that for biodiversity or for climate change, we know all the solutions. The problem is, if we, as I said before, if we all chose different solutions, then it doesn't have a big impact. If we select a few ones, we agree that they are the more impactful. You say impactful? Mm-hmm. And if everybody goes on to these ones, well, you may have quickly more results, and then you feel when you have a first result, then you will go for another and another. So that's the challenge that's a bet we're making now with this process. And
Virginie, the bridge builder. Where you're building.
Actually, I like that. In my different hats, one of my hats is to be the president of a regional committee, like the equivalent of IPCC, but for the region around Nantes, the Pays de Loire. So I work with scientists.
Wait.
And it's for the regional administration and politicians. So, and then in another hat, I am in committees in companies, what we call comité de mission, which means their raison d'être. Their commitments towards social and environmental responsibilities, to check that what they say and do is the same. So here I'm in connection with the strategy of the companies, the CEOs, and so on. And then I work with association, and I am myself in a research center. And what is interesting is to connect all of that. And then I can hear that we are not, they don't speak the same language. And it's really hard to understand your neighbor if you don't speak the same language. But the scientists have some concern, and they express it one way. The companies another way, and then you have the political
public administration,
public administration another way, and so to create convergence. How do you say that?
Convergence.
I want to dedicate my work now to create convergence.
Exactly.
All the interests.
Yeah. And stand as a translator for all of these people.
Exactly.
So basically, Virginie, the multi-hat bridge builder and translator. And so, there's so many ways we could go. I'm just curious, if I tell you midnight, just what comes to mind as the first? Maybe it's just an image of the night. It doesn't have to be related necessarily to your field of work. What does midnight evoke?
The minute before tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. And so what does that?
So if the day was not good, well, then you go to a new day. So the new day might be excellent. So midnight is it's a passage. I have one memory just right now.
Yes.
It was in the Sahara in Algeria, in a city called El Oued, and I remember laying on the floor and hearing the music coming from a city, a village nearby, and people were really happy. And I was watching this guy, and in the Sahara, you can see it very well because there is no pollution, no lights, and it was. It was amazing. This very moment, I can feel it still, and it was really in the middle of the night. So I'm not sure it was midnight, 11 or 1, but roughly that's very powerful. And so you realize how small you are, a really tiny little part of the whole, but you belong to it.
Do you remember? Do you have what is it that you wanted to do when you were Violette's age? She's 10, 9.
I'm very lucky because I did what I wanted to do when I was a kid. When I was my daughter's age, I wanted to be several things. I wanted to be doctors in Africa for children in Africa. I wanted to be a journalist. And a bit later, I wanted to go on stage to be a comedian, but on stage, not for movies, but really on stage. And okay, so that were my dreams. And then I used to work for Doctors Without Borders during 16 years. I was not a doctor, but I was in an organization which worked for the health of people and, of course, kids and a lot in Africa. And
in the field.
Yeah, exactly. I did travel a lot. I was lucky enough to travel a lot and write many articles and work for a TV program. And so I was not a journalist, I was more a scientist, but still I'm very much into vulgarization, transmitting, translating, yeah. So, and on stage I do conference a lot. So finally I fulfill all my childhood dream. And I did not try actually, that were my dream, then I forgot about it. And the last but not least thing is, when I was 12 exactly, I recently found the book. I wrote an essay at school. And it's like a book. And so I wrote with nice letters and design and the story. So when was it? It was in the 70s, late 70s, and the story was I think Kronos, the time, who has just what Kronos? I don't remember. The one who has the planet on his shoulder.
It is Kronos. I think.
It is Kronos, yeah. And he was really tired in the story. Kronos is really old and tired, and he turns, with earth on his shoulder. It's heavy, and he decides he wants to go on holiday. So he gives the mission to make the earth turn to his son, and goes to another planet somewhere to rest. And the son makes a big mistake and turns the other way around. And then you have hurricanes, you have droughts, you have fires, you have all natural disasters. And then you have famine and chaos, and that's what I describe.
So interesting. It gives me goosebumps.
And at the end, well, Kronos comes back and everything is. But exactly the climate change, and it's.
So you were preoccupied already.
Because nobody was mentioning it. I was 12, and the Meadows report and thing, I didn't hear about that. So it was just my imagination. But it's funny to see that this story now it's a story I'm working on. So
predestined
to put the Earth back on track, the right rotation. So I think I'm very aligned with my childhood, actually, what I had in my childhood.
That's beautiful.
It's a luck.
And if I ask you for a color, what comes to mind?
Red.
Why?
Revolution.
And to come back to Jean-Christophe, because you wanted to pay homage and to, or just you know, how would you describe him in a few words? And then you mentioned these projects that you had, you know, and then from 1 minute to the next, these projects disappeared. Maybe are you still in the legacy of some of those, or just it could? This is a double question, but
he was a humanist. He was somebody who was totally he was profoundly, I mean, deeply a humanist. You say humanist, yeah. He was a geopolitician. He was quite known in France because he was in a TV program, a weekly TV program, which was very successful. He was an excellent teacher. And then he was very concerned by the world evolution. And actually when he died, it was just after the election of Trump. And he was really depressed, very depressed. And sometimes I tell when I see the democracy evolution at the moment, the environment, he was very, very, very much concerned by the environment. So when I see all the recent the four last years events and catastrophes, and I tell myself that maybe he left on the right time for him, because he was already so much depressed by all of that. He had a cabin. We still have the cabin in the forest. That was his. He was really very much rooted in that place, in a lodge cabin in the middle of the forest. He liked woods. He liked to do things with his hands, and he liked nature. And it's still a very strong legacy to me. Then, what is also true is he had such a strong personality. He was much older than me, and also he was quite famous. His father, he came from a famous family too. So being his wife was professionally not too easy. Sometimes was not that easy. Although he always tried to help me. I mean, he was not, like putting me on the side, but sometimes when people would ask me a question, I would answer to it, but they would still speak to him. What I mean is, it's difficult to exist with such a strong person next to you. And many things I did since he left, I would probably have not done them if he was still here, very likely. I know he strongly believed in what I could do, really. And actually, that's how we met, because we had the same curiosity and the same concern for the rest of the world, same deep curiosity about everything: music, geography, history, arts, environment, everything. So this I keep, but some of the thing, in terms of conference, in terms of daring, just because I have no choice. I have the 3 children. I must survive. I mean, I must provide them with schools and a house and holidays. And so I have to work a lot. And then many things that I would not have. It was more comfortable to be behind somehow than to be in the front. But if I don't go to the front now, I cannot afford to do what now. So that's what we call a hidden gift. When he left, he really. I had this hidden gift from him. Everything he's still a model. Sometimes when I hesitate or I wonder, I try to think, what would have he done in the same situation? Or sometimes I do something and say, I tell him, "Oh, aren't you proud of me? I mean, I did that." You know, it's he's still a kind of motivation for me.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Virginie. Is there anything that you feel you'd want to share on, the theme of midnight, or?
What I try to, and it's difficult
Yes.
with my children, what I try to tell them and teach them is
Yes.
dare, do dare. Trust yourself and dare. Be free. Make your own ideas and opinion by yourself, not by social networks or no. You have to experience things before making yourself an opinion. Don't be afraid of the difference. The other, if he's different, then he will bring you something. If he's like you, he won't bring you so much. He cannot, because he's like you. So go to different people and trust them. And when you, another something which was very helpful to me, when you're in front of a big decision and you don't know, you have choice between two options, and it's really hard to choose. Maybe one you have to dare more, is more risky, the other one is more security, or more. What I do in that case is I imagine myself being 80 years old already, looking back and asking myself, what do you want to see from that? What decision you want to remember you took at that time? And that works, not all the time, but most of the time. I mean, it tells you what is really the one where you want to go. It doesn't mean you will go, because it's still difficult, but it helps to be honest with yourself.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Magnifique.
It was a pleasure.
Hi, this is Jerry Michalski again, StoryThreading for Unfinished 21. This time the session is Virginie interviewed by Ella. And here they are in my brain. Here is Virginie, who in 1992 had started a lab, or think tank actually, with her husband, Jean-Christophe Victor, who died an untimely death, although he lived a really full life. But when he passed away, Virginie's life really changed dramatically. Her kids were 4, 5, and 9, and then she sat them down and they started rethinking and together planning their future lives, which were going to have to be really different. So her kids shifted from being victims of change to being actors of change. And there's a really lovely section of this conversation which is about coping successfully over time with change, but also struggling with, at one point she wanted to take her life. She just was really lost. But the piece of the conversation that really drew me in, that I'd like to head toward, is this idea of the fact that a unifying direction for addressing climate change hasn't been defined. And I'm going to get to it first by going to another talk that I sort of processed into my brain recently. It's one of my favorite talks. It's by George Monbiot. It's a TED talk from 2019, and I wrote down that it's excellent. That's a little bit of my editorial here. And in this talk, he says, hey, we actually don't have a story. You know, when we have no story that explains the present and describes the future, hope evaporates. And he then describes how the neoliberal story, which we are still in, replaced Keynes's story. And here's John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist. And I'll do a quick summary because I took notes in my brain. And the Keynes story was, hey, and this is how all the stories begin, disorder afflicts the land, caused by the powerful and nefarious forces of the economic elite, which have captured the world's wealth. And then the hero of the story, the enabling state, supported by working class and middle class people, will contest that disorder, will fight those powerful forces by redistributing wealth, and through spending public money on public goods, will generate income and jobs, restoring harmony to the land. And all the stories end with restoring harmony to the land. And this was the story kind of since World War II through the beginning of the neoliberal era, which happens around Clinton, Thatcher, that kind of era. Reagan, the Reagan Revolution turns into neoliberalism, which Democrats buy into entirely. I have a whole other thread about sort of the rise of neoliberalism and how that worked. In fact, here's the thought: most progressives bought the neoliberal agenda, which is connected to Bill Clinton was a good Republican president, which is one of my beliefs. The little purple thoughts are more editorial, more my beliefs. If I go back to the neoliberal story, you'll see that it's pretty different from Keynes. Disorder afflicts the land, caused by the powerful and nefarious forces of the over-mighty state, whose collectivizing tendencies crush freedom and individualism and opportunity. That's our problem, and the hero of the story, the entrepreneur, will fight those powerful forces, roll back the state, and through creating wealth and opportunity, restore harmony to the land. And Monbiot's statement in this talk is that, hey, we're missing the better new story. The progressives have shown up. I think a lot of people are really angry about the neoliberal story. It hasn't really worked out in a lot of places. It's destroying the earth while it's keeping a lot of people in poverty. And he proposes something he calls the restoration story. Disorder afflicts the land, caused by the powerful and nefarious forces of people who say there's no such thing as society, who tell us that our highest purpose in life is to fight like stray dogs over a dustbin. The heroes of this story are us. We'll revolt against this disorder. We will fight those nefarious forces by building rich, engaging, inclusive, and generous communities. And in doing so, we will restore harmony to the land. And that's his story. He's offering it up in 2019 as what might replace neoliberalism, which is also a thought in my brain. So when Virginie looks at this question, she's talking a lot about how to talk about this. So if you think about economic models or technical solutions, you pull in different directions. It's hard to make technical climate change issues sexy. The issue of climate makes people sometimes autistic. They don't listen to others. And then she tells the story about the formation of the European Union and tells it in a nice way about the Steel and Coal Board that started not that long after the end of World War II, when France and Germany were mortal enemies. And here in the Coal and Steel Board, they and England begin to make friends again and figure out how to work together as a European Union, which later grows into the European Union, which Brexit has since torn asunder in some pretty big ways over the last couple of years. She also makes the statement that it's very hard to move systems, but when they do shift, it can be quite fast, which I agree with. And a piece of that is, how do we find the new story? But then she points out something I'm hearing more and more in lots of different places. More than half of young people are extremely concerned about climate change, to the point where they're changing their behaviors. So she points to a report that came out, Young People's Voices on Climate Anxiety, Government Betrayal and Moral Injury, a Global Phenomenon. This is a recent 2021 study about climate anxiety, teen anxiety, and I've got this connected to a thought that I'll go to in a second. Does 2020 mark a generational tipping point? This is an important thought to me. But 4 out of 10 young people fear having children due to climate crisis. This is a pretty huge thing. So for me, I'm really, really interested in what young people are doing right now. Between Greta Thunberg and school strikes for climate change in America, the Douglas High School students who are trying to do arms reductions, the Green New Deal, all of us, Jacinda Ardern being the Prime Minister of New Zealand, really young. There's a whole bunch of young people who are doing things, and if they manage to link arms and work together, not in unison in the uniform sense with only one message, which the far right has actually done really well, but with a unifying message that resonates, that unifies people, and they can turn that into a convincing story, then I think we actually might have a whole lot of possibility to fix this mess that we're in. So this conversation, of course, didn't end with a solution to all the world's problems, but it dug into and opened up a whole lot of really interesting paths for me. So thanks for listening.